Hi class, and welcome to your next video on natural selection and adaptations. So this is going to be our first video over the topic of evolution, and evolution, just remember, is how we are constantly changing and adapting to our environment, and it is a constant process. So the first thing we want to talk about is what is adaptation. So there are several forms of adaptation. There's behavioral, structural, biochemical, and physiological. So a behavioral adaptation is exactly what it sounds like. It's the changes in one's behavior to help it with its environment. This is going to be something that literally is changing the animal's behavior. So maybe its sleep patterns, changing something about its behavior in order to help it survive. There's a structural adaptation. So structural adaptation would be like having longer legs or having a better set of wings. That's going to give it some kind of advantage over another individual. A biochemical adaptation is just what it sounds like. It's going to be a change in its amino acid sequence or DNA sequence. It has to do with the lipids, proteins, nucleic acids, and that's going to help it in order to give it some kind of advantage. And the last one is the physiological, how all the pieces of the body work together, and somehow it might have adapted to change and work together. So one thing to note is that a population is going to evolve, not an individual. So we might have an adaptation in an individual, but we will not call that evolution. We have to have it in a population as a whole. So adaptation is specific to its environment, and it happens through the process we call natural selection. So Darwin's theory of natural selection, it started with the Greek philosopher Aristotle, who viewed species as perfect and unchanging. In the century prior to Darwin, the study of fossils suggested that a species changed over time, and Jean-Baptiste Lamarck suggested that life on Earth could be changed due to use and disuse, exactly what it sounds like. If you use it, you're going to maintain it. If you don't use it, you're going to lose it. So the other thing he suggested was inheritance of acquired characteristics. So natural selection is the differential survival of and reproduction of individuals within a population. Darwin was influenced by Lyell and his principles of geology, and he came to realize that Earth was very old, and that over time, present-day species have arisen from ancestral species by natural selection. Now, how did he come to this whole thought of natural selection? Darwin took a voyage on the HMS Beagle, and when he took that voyage, what happened was he went to the Galapagos Islands, and he saw that on different islands of the Galapagos Islands, there were finches, and their beaks were different, and they were different based on what they ate and based on the environment of the island. And he came up with the theory that whatever advantage that one had, it was able to survive better. And so we came up with the theory that natural selection is basically the survival of the fittest. We're surviving based on what we need, and we're adapting to that environment based on what we need. And so this is where we get the thought of survival of the fittest. And fittest doesn't necessarily mean that we are actually big and strong. It means that we can survive and reproduce in whatever environment we have. So present-day species descended from a common ancestor, and they became modified along the way due to natural selection, and this was specific to their environment via natural selection. Darwin observed that organisms produce more offspring than the environment could support, and organisms vary in many traits. So this was all due to his theory of natural selection, and he modified it based on what he was seeing. So, three things to remember about natural selection and adaptation. Individuals do not evolve, but populations evolve. Natural selection can amplify or diminish only heritable traits. Acquired characteristics cannot be passed on to offspring. So if someone has had an appendectomy, obviously their offspring are still going to have an appendix. They're not going to pass on the fact that they do not have an appendix because it is still in their DNA to have an appendix. Evolution is not goal-directed and does not lead to perfection. There is no perfect organism. There are only favorable traits that vary from environment to environment. Okay, so make sure you got some good notes here. And go ahead and write down any questions as well, and we'll talk about this in class.